Let me introduce myself. I'm Nichola Meyer. I'm the principal of the Writers College, and I have been for the last 16 years. And it's amazing to have you all join us tonight. And we all bonded by our love of writing. So I'm going to hand over to our experts who are going to be leading the discussion tonight, answering your questions. Now, we did receive a huge amount of questions in the last 2 weeks because we asked people to send them in a little bit earlier. So the chance for everyone to ask live questions, we will do that at the end, but you know, if there's only a little bit of time, I do apologize, and we are going to do this again because there's no way we can get through these, we reckon about 3 hours of questions. So so I'm going to hand over to our fabulous tutors. They're all award-winning writers. Some of them have worked at the Writers College for over 10 years, and they are absolutely adored by their students. So we've got 4 people on the panel tonight. So I'm going to start with Alex. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Alex, and I tutor the novel writing course and the advanced novel writing course and literary short fiction, advanced short fiction, memoir, and advanced memoir courses. And I have written and had published with Penguin Random House in South Africa 5 novels and numerous short stories that have been published in anthologies and journals. And yeah, that's me. And I'm very glad to be here.
Great, thank you. Elsa.
Hi, I'm Elsa Winckler, and I write in Afrikaans and English. I mostly publish in Afrikaans. I have, I think, 51 books so far over the past 13 years that I've been writing. Short stories and 2 children's, well, 1 children's book, the other one is coming out later this year, and also some short stories in magazines and anthologies. And yes, I really enjoy working with students. I do the Afrikaans skryfroman cursus. That's what I'm doing at SA Writers.
Thank you, Elsa. Welcome. Sonny.
Hi, everybody. Kia ora from New Zealand. I teach novel writing, advanced novel writing, and short fiction, short literary and flash fiction. I've published 8, 9 novels, 10 novels. I say that if I'm not sure, it's because one was reprinted, so almost a complete rewrite. I actually started publishing articles and nonfiction 24 years before I published my first novel. So my whole life has been writing professionally, and I write now at ghostwriting. I work part-time for a small publisher, and I do some ghostwriting, and yeah, short stories and anthologies, and I think that's about me. Oh, and I worked as one of the writers for the television series Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis.
Thanks, Sonny. Helen.
I'm Helen. I teach the basics and the advanced courses in creative writing and write a book for children. I've been writing for 20 years and have published 50 or 60 books for children, both for the trade and for the educational market. And I've been tutoring at the college for 12 years.
Great. Well, a big welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being willing to spend an hour of your time giving us your wisdom and your experience over the last few decades. So, to our tutors, how advantageous is it to have an online presence? I notice that most writers and authors now have blogs and use social media to advertise their work. Is that important? And is there one social media platform that is more effective than another?
Can I start by saying that I once had a conversation with the editor at Penguin Random House in South Africa, and he said to me that if presented with 2 debut novels, both equally with equal potential, and they had to choose between the two authors. They didn't perhaps have the budget for both. The marketing department would probably give the go-ahead to the writer who had the online presence. So I think that if you are a debut novelist wanting to get published, it would be important to have an online presence. And then afterwards, obviously, to promote your work, it's essential. Having said that, I hate Twitter, and I used to blog a lot, but I just don't do it anymore. And I mean, I can see the difference in sales. So I just can't do it anymore. So there we go.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can just maybe say that I think it's nowadays, you know, with everybody on social media, you really need to have a presence of some sorts. And I found that I get the most sort of sales reaction, immediate reaction on Instagram. Whereas with Facebook, you know, it all depends, because each one of these sort of have a different way of operating, which, you know, being my age, I'm not always sure about, but, you know, you can see this. But I think Instagram, you have a more sort of instant kind of reaction to a picture, to, you know, just a few words. Yeah, Twitter, and I'm not always also quite sure what to say there. This morning, there was this hilarious conversation on Twitter from the one girl who said, well, she asked on Twitter, she asked something and she had about 5 reactions, whereas somebody that said, how do you like your sandwich? Got about 400 reactions, you know, so you have to know what to do where. And that isn't always that easy, but there's a lot of help outside. And so I just think it's important to be, you know, to be there, to be seen. I think that's important.
When my agent was trying to sell one of my novels to the UK market, the publisher checked and didn't buy because I hadn't updated my website recently enough.
I think there's another aspect to it too. It depends on who you're marketing to. If you're writing young adult fiction, your market might be more like TikTok, Instagram, and there's a certain demographic that won't look at Facebook. I mean, they literally will not look at it, full stop. And particularly a younger generation coming through are finding are much less inclined to use Facebook. They're thinking, oh, that's so last decade.
Yeah, old
so
people.
always comes down to who are you trying to market to is going to dictate what platform you need to use.
So a very interesting question here from Sarah. Regarding the question about social media presence, are you advertising yourself as a person, so what you ate for breakfast, or is it about your writing?
I think there's an interesting mix that you need to get right. I think there's a formula, something like 30, 30, 30, you know, 30%, you know, personal, 30% about your writing, you know, the other about, you know, just ordinary stuff. And, you know, I find that if I've just posted something where I had tea with my little granddaughter, and you know, that was the most clicks I got from everything that I've posted before. So there are certain things that people like to know about you, you know, that sort of just, yeah, apparently tickles the crowd. So I think one should do that, but then also, you know, just keep the balance. That is important. You know, they feel they get to know you, and yeah, there's that mutual. I follow Reese Witherspoon, for instance, you know, and she will. You know, then she has a dress, then she's with a little dog, then she's with her son. So in the end, you kind of feel, well, I know her, you know, and that is, I think that is what happens with you as a writer as well, with your online presence. Yeah.
Well, you become a bit of a celebrity.
Well, don't think about it like that, but yeah, it's just, you know, yeah, people seem to be interested in all sorts of things, what you eat, what you have for dinner, you know, so.
I just want to say, I think the minimum that you need to have is your own website, somewhere where if somebody's interested in your book, they could maybe go there. Or if you're an unpublished writer, then perhaps a blog that just sort of puts you out there. There was a question that came up about why should people be interested in me if I'm unknown? It doesn't have to always be about you. It could be like, like a blog. It could be, let's say you live in New Zealand and you tending your sheep or whatever. It could be something that's just interesting, just putting yourself out there, and perhaps every now and then you do a review of books or something like that. You can just put yourself out there. But I also don't think that, even though I know it is important to be on social media, I think you as the writer also have the right to say, I don't want to tell everyone what I had on my sandwich, and I'm not going to spend my energy doing that. I think it's good to have some kind of online presence. But I also, I mean, personally, I'm not a great fan of social media. And I don't have time to read about everybody's things that they're doing. And I don't really want to be putting my life out there that much. So, I think you have the right to choose not to do that, and might make marketing the book a bit more of a challenge. But I think if at least you've got a blog where you don't have to be that personal about what you're doing, you could be showing people the sites in the city you live in, or something that relates to your novel indirectly, not just extracts from your novel, but let's say your novel is science fiction. Maybe you could look at interesting things to do with trends in science fiction in your blog. So sort of references, but not overt references to your work all the time.
Well, thank you very much for all of that. I did just want to briefly mention that we do have a course that is particularly geared towards building your author platform. You actually build a website that you have full control over, so you can update it as much as you want and get your social media channels working really nicely and professionally, because you become a brand. And it's what brand do you want to be? How do you convey that to the public? And how do you keep a cohesion with that brand? And we're coming up, we're getting questions about using a pseudonym. I think we might get to that a little bit later, because it is something that people, or we can even do that right now. Let's do that. How do you build a profile if you use a pseudonym? But we had a whole bunch of questions about, should you use a pseudonym? Should we just throw that open to our panelists right now?
I've used a pseudonym. I ghostwrite. Before, funny enough, when I was writing for Stargate, I deliberately kept my facial features obscured. There were no photos of me. Social media wasn't particularly intense then, so I was able to keep. And I do have 3 social media accounts, one of which is a personal one, two of which are professional accounts. And my face is deliberately obscured. And part of the reason for that is when I was writing for Stargate, the series is famous, but you become famous by association. And it's quite often not a good idea, particularly when you're having to go to conventions. And also having an androgynous first name was quite useful, because at one point I remember actually getting on stage and I was with the actors and we were all talking about different things. People were saying, well, who are you? And somebody actually got up and said, but you write like a man. I didn't realize you were a girl. And they were most offended by the fact that I wrote military sci-fi and I was a woman. So there are definite advantages in it, but you can use a generic photo on your Facebook page and just completely hide your identity. Mm-hmm. It's a character. Become a character in your own real life story.
Elsa, did you want to add to that?
Now, I think there's one particular question that somebody asked me. I think in Afrikaans, it's a little bit different because the market is so much smaller. So I mostly write romance, but then I write inspirational as well, which has sort of like a more of a Christian view. But then I also write steamy stuff, and I've been asked this a lot. How do you sort of manage the two? I said, well, being a Christian doesn't mean you can't have sex or talk about sex, so that I always find that a very strange question. But initially, with the first sort of steamy kind of thing I wrote, I used a pseudonym, sort of basically just thinking maybe I must keep this separate, but it just didn't work, so because, as I say, I think the market in Afrikaans is just too small. I think the English market, there's definitely a difference. People, and also I just have to say this, that erotica in Afrikaans is very different to erotica in English. What people see as steamy is sort of just basically like 3-4, ratings on the steamy. What do you mean? Yeah. So yeah, it's because it's definitely a more conservative market. So so I think that is in Afrikaans, for me, it didn't work. So I write with as Elsa Winckler in both things. And then I think the one question was whether I write fantasy. It wasn't fantasy. The one specific anthology that she was referring to was actually, erotic writing. It was an anthology of different erotic stories. But I haven't. Nobody has sort of directly said to me, how could you do this? But this, so I don't think in Afrikaans it's a problem.
Helen, have you ever used a pseudonym, and do you know authors that do?
I haven't, which I should have, because I published a memoir under my own name and then got cut out of my mother's will. So a pseudonym would have been fiscally wise. I know a couple of writers of serious literary fiction who write for You magazine, which is like a very popular weekly magazine, very lowbrow, and they use pseudonyms, but they write stories for the pair and use pseudonyms for that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Alex, do you have anything to add there?
I think that from the marketing point of view, unless you have a very specific reason to use a pseudonym, like Sonny mentioned, or with Elsa, she said it didn't work. It's actually better just to use your own name, because it's just easier. You're going to be doing lots of radio interviews and so things where you have to talk about yourself probably when you're promoting the book. So you may as well be yourself, unless you have a very strong reason not to be yourself, which might be being cut out of your mother's will. But the other way that I've heard it is when people write as teams. So they're two writers, so they don't use both of their names. They kind of make a new name which represents the 2 or 3 of them. I think it's quite useful in that point of view when you're doing a teamwork.
Mm-hmm. I know in our previous Q&A, Tanya was mentioning that if you write in 2 specific genres, so that you don't confuse your market, then generally for your second genre that you write for, you would use a pen name. But if you're just going to write one kind of fiction, whatever it is, detective novels, if you can use your own name, it would make your life easier. I think that's the general feeling. Yeah. Okay, there's so many questions coming through, but let me answer one from the existing list quickly. I know I'm meant to kill my darlings, but I get excited about new ideas and want them all in my story. I'm never sure which ones need to go. What process do writers go through to edit out their superfluous darlings or exciting ideas? And at what stage of the writing process should we be doing that?
I would say, what is important is that everything you write, whatever scene you put into your story should contribute to the story. It should move your story forward. So if it doesn't do that, then take it out. It's like love scenes and kissing scenes and describing, the beautiful scenery. Does it contribute in any way to your story, to the mood maybe, then yes, but if not, then leave it out. So yeah, that would be what I suggest.
Thanks, Elsa.
I tell students to think of this thing that they're writing now, this novel or this scene or this short story, as just one in their whole library of works they're going to write over the next 20, 30 years. And so you don't want to use all your best ideas in your first one. You want to keep some for later. So just store them away in a file and come back. You'll be glad later.
Great.
You can't have a cast of millions in your story, because a story is about people. And how many people's stories do you want to tell in one story? So keep all those wonderful characters, those wonderful personality traits, those wonderful actions, and file them away. Next story.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sonny. Alex, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I maybe read what you're writing aloud. It also helps you to hear where something is, the pace is dragging, and you can perhaps just cross the whole paragraph out. And then something that's come up in a few of our other meetings is to have a writers group and to get somebody, feedback. So one of the great advantages with the courses is the tutor feedback. The notes are great, but it's actually having somebody else to read for you is a huge help with editing, because sometimes one can't actually see what bits need to be cut out, and having another pair of eyes is incredibly advantageous. So have a writers group and read aloud.
Yeah, great. Does anyone have anything else to add on that point?
I've had students who've used, I think it's called Wattpad, which is an online big, huge group. And they've really, really learned technical stuff from just having peer review. I'd really recommend that. They were teenagers, so I don't know whether it's a young thing.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. How do you decide what to write about? So what if you've got a deadline in particular, say a publishing deadline, and where do you get those ideas from under pressure? Sonny, would you like to kick off?
Oh, wow. Where do I get my ideas from? Well, a large part of my working life at the moment is writing quite a lot of content about climate change and about impacts of climate change and the science, because I'm a science communicator. I've got so many ideas and my head's bursting with them, so I can't get them out fast enough. But I mean, here's an example today. I was reading something on one of the science magazines. Human-monkey hybrid embryos may help scientists understand human biology and disease. Gee, where have we heard that before? I think they made a movie out of it called Planet of the Apes. Read copiously. And a lot of my reading, most of my reading is science and science journals. And there's so many amazing ideas coming up all the time. So all I can say is just read.
Thanks, Sonny. Elsa, did you want
Yes,
to say?
no, I can agree. When you read and you watch people and you listen to stories, that's when you get your ideas. It just, once it starts, everything becomes a what if, this can just become a story. And it starts from there. And as far as the deadline is concerned, I find that when I have a deadline, I actually, and you sort of forced to sit and just concentrate, then it just happens. And I also think, don't force something. There's a lot to be said for just getting up and go for a walk or go to sleep, because one's subconscious, the story goes on there. And when you wake up, when you come back, the things have sort of just, fallen together, and you know what you have to do. And it's also, I think it's also important to get to know your characters as you write. So that's a process. It doesn't happen so quickly. So you can't force things. You have to, let it slowly develop. And then at the end, you find that, then it goes quicker. Well, that's how it works for me anyway.
I agree. Read and also keep a notebook, because sometimes as you're reading, I mean, there are just too many ideas, like Sonny says, and you can't deal with them all at once. And if you don't keep a notebook, then you might just forget some of the good ones, or maybe not. But I do find that it's handy to just jot down a few notes, and you might return to that page a couple of years later and think, yeah, that was a great idea. I can work on that one now.
Helen, did you want to add something there? Thanks,
No,
Alex.
the problem isn't ideas when you've got a deadline. It's ideas when you don't have a deadline.
I agree.
Yeah. Nothing like a deadline to light a fire under you.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm actually going to take one of these questions here. Let me have a look here. Maybe I can actually do both at the same time. One that was sent in a week ago. What are the advantages and disadvantages of submitting a manuscript locally compared to sending it overseas? And then at the same time, one of the questions that's just come in now, when submitting an article or story for publication, what distinguishes one manuscript from another? For instance, why would editors choose one above another? I know reviewing submission guidelines for each publication are important. So what tips can authors give us in this regard? Sorry if it's awkward if I put those two together, but let's have a look. Okay, well, Sonny, do you want to go ahead?
The advantages and disadvantages. I honestly think you should submit to the market. You don't submit an adult fiction story to a children's publisher. So the first thing you need to do is identify what your market's going to be, and then you look at submitting. And there's really no point. I mean, even submitting science fiction to a publisher that only takes fantasy, it can come down to that sometimes. And the second thing you talk about locally or overseas, again, it depends on if you're writing a story in Afrikaans, you're not going to submit it to a publisher in London. So you really do need to identify your market. If you submit to someone like HarperCollins, quite often they will want to buy international rights anyway. So it always comes down to identifying your market, and then if you're offered a contract, then you can start looking at it. But generally speaking, once upon a time, you could sell from country to country, but now there's quite often, they will want all the international rights to it.
Yeah.
I remembered my point.
Yes.
Which is that if the publisher, your agent who you have submitted to, has already got a book in that stable that fits that genre, they're not going to take it no matter how much they love it. So there's also that. So if you write a Hunger Games kind of thing, and you submit it to whoever published Hunger Games, they're going to say no. Because they don't want to compete with the Hunger Games that they're already selling. So be careful of that.
Okay, so that's an excellent point. So you have to fit the publication that you're submitting to completely in terms of genre, but you also can't fit so well that you're duplicating a bestseller that they already have. Very good point, thanks. Elsa, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, that's what, well, with the Afrikaans market is sort of easier in a sense that there's one big romance publisher in South Africa, and they can't keep up, they keep telling us that, people are sort of, voracious readers, and they just don't have enough. So it's an easier market in the sense that once you're in, you can be sure that your next book will also be published, which is not true in the English market out there. I also find that South African publishers won't easily publish an English novel or English romance because the competition is so strong. So I've never even tried. I go overseas. I've been with HarperCollins. What do they call that now? First chapter, one chapter, and I was Chile. So that sort of find a footing there. And I think the other part of that one thing was why would editors choose one manuscript and not another. It's what was it Sonny that said, you know, when they have enough of a certain type, they won't sort of have an additional one as far as that's concerned. And then also writing, you know, if your writing is superb and your writing is good, that's why it's so important not to send in a manuscript if it hasn't been edited and edited and edited, you know, and that's where a critique partner comes in that can help you and make sure there are no typos, that it's neat. If they ask for a Times Roman 12, give them a Times Roman 12, you know, don't decide on your own font or something. So stick to the submission rules, I'd say.
And whatever you do, don't send in your manuscript the moment you write the end.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah,
You
put it
want
in your
to. I know
drawer
you
and
want to.
Yeah, you want to because you're so excited. But put it in your drawer and don't touch it for 3 months. Then take it out again.
Unless you're on a deadline.
Rising, it's like bread rising. You've got to let it prove. You've got to let the dough rise.
Yeah.
Bake it.
Alex, do you have something to add on this matter?
Well, with the South African English fiction market, the local publishers definitely want local content, especially from a debut novelist. If you've had other novels published with the publisher, then you know, you could write a potentially totally fantastical landscape or set it somewhere else. But if you're a debut novelist, they really do want local content. They want it to be set in South Africa because that is their brief as the local imprint. You know, they can get books set around the world from the big from their international branches. So local content is essential for local publishers in South Africa, but I'm not sure how that is in New Zealand, Sonny. I don't know whether it's like that there for a debut novelist.
To be honest, I don't know, because all of my work's been published in North America and the UK and Australia. All my work in New Zealand is non-fiction articles, and yeah, pretty much, yeah, it's all been non-fiction in New Zealand.
Question about, I'm just going now to this group, a question from the group. How do you get people to read your work? Do you ask your friends? I can see this could be problematic. What is the difference between an alpha reader and a beta reader? And how do you know you've got the right people for the job? Alex, do you want to say something about that?
I would not necessarily give it to my friends unless my friends are actual writers, preferably published writers. And then definitely I would be confident giving it to them, not to my family either. And I also do think it's beneficial even to pay someone to give you a critique on something. At the college, we do offer manuscript assessments and short story critiques. I really think if you're serious about some piece of work, that to get objective feedback from a professional reader is very useful, and failing that, to belong to a writers group, preferably with other professional writers, so you can share, you can give each other feedback. So instead of paying for feedback, you pay by reading their work and giving critique for them in turn. Yeah, or do a course with the Writers College, because then you get feedback regularly.
I mean, I'll just quickly jump in there and say that we did just do this Write 5 Stories in 5 months challenge, where a big part of it was developing or training writers to give feedback. And it's not easy in the beginning. Maybe you don't know what to say, you can feel when something doesn't work in a piece of writing, but how do you say it, and how do you say it in a kind way? And it's very difficult. And it was amazing to see these writers, you know, come together over the 5 months so that they could you know, they were all sounding like professional writers by the end. It was amazing.
My husband reads my stories. He's at some point in his life, he wrote ministerial speeches. So he's very good at the grammar part and the spelling, and he picks up typos. But my Afrikaans stories, I don't, you know, I don't have anybody reading them, but I do the English ones. I have a critique partner that you know, check the tenses, the slang, the, you know, just the lingo that is different in English than in Afrikaans. And also, of course, if you write for the USA market is different to the UK market, there are just ways of saying things that are different. So you should also make sure you know who you want eventually to, where you want eventually to send your manuscript to make sure about those. Spelling, same with spelling, is different in you know, American than that it is in the UK. So yeah, just check that. But it's important, I think, to have somebody objective read your stuff. That's very true. Give you an honest critique. You know, that I think is necessary.
Yeah, I belong to a writers cohort, and in fact, unfortunately, one of our members, who's a very well-known romance writer, died on the weekend. Which I only found that out this morning. Her name is Valerie Parv. And did you know Valerie by any chance?
I know of her. I just know of her. Yeah.
She was one of my writing cohort, funny enough. And the other, and I don't generally read romance as such, but having the cohort we had was such a mixed bag of people that you were really able to pick up on. It was just a really good way to have a different perspective. And you're looking for the same thing. You're still looking for story, regardless of the genre. The second thing is I also co-authored a number, and I still do for that matter, co-author a number of things. And that's brilliant because you can literally write something, send it off to the other person, they'll send it back, they've fixed all that mess up that you've made. Then they produce their own amazing work. You look at it and think, I'll just give up and go home. But you could have corrected a few things they've done. And then the process becomes incredibly rapid because you get used to each other's little peccadillos. But I also read to my son. And when you read to your children, and particularly when it came to the Stargate universe, he couldn't talk about it to anybody because we're under contract not to reveal anything. But he'd sit there and say, that's rubbish, Mum. Children are alarmingly honest. Yeah. And if you can read children, they'll turn around and tell you and they'll fall asleep. Go, right, well, get rid of all that because he's bored. So yeah, that was my cohort.
Right. Helen and Alex, do you have anything else that you'd like to jump in with?
Yeah, when I'm writing for a novel for children, especially younger kids, I will go to a school and negotiate with a teacher that I can arrive every day just straight after big break or lunch or whatever, and spend 15 minutes and read a chapter. And it helped when I was working at the school. I don't know how I do it now, but most teachers are really pleased to have some input from someone else and be able to just have 15 minutes to take a break. But what I found was that the kids would just get up and sharpen their pencils as soon as it got boring, or they would start talking or fidgeting. And then I would, as I read, I would have a pencil and I would squiggle in the what's it called? The margin, to say bored, so I knew later they were bored, and then I would go back afterwards and fix that to tighten it up somehow. But children are ruthless. Don't read to your own children or to your grandchildren who love you, because they'll just think, well, any garbage you write is great. But you've got to write to children who don't know you, and then you will, it's shattering. But when they love it, they love it. And they're also very good on endings. I've read one novel where they hated the ending, hated it. And that was really good feedback because I went back and rewrote it.
Alex?
No, I agree. I think children are actually great. Although I said I wouldn't give it to my family. I would read a story to my boys because like Sonny and Helen have said, they're very brutally honest. And what's great about their feedback is they just like walk off or leave, or they don't want to hear the rest. They don't try and tell you how you should solve it. And I think sometimes with non-professional other readers, they might try and kind of fix the problem for you by giving you strange ideas that could be off-putting, whereas professional writers, when they give feedback, are much more open-ended. They'll just say, you know, this section doesn't work, and then it's up to you as the writer to come up with a way that it does work, or to cross out the paragraphs that are boring or whatever.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to self-publishing. Now, I'll just be very brief with this, because if you haven't self-published, because I know some of our tutors have and they are passionate about it, does anyone want to mention, you know, is self-publishing worth it? Do these stories get traction? Do publishers ever pick up on them? So does anyone want to jump in there?
I know some writers who do self-publish, and there's several secrets to being successful at it. And one is that if you're writing a whole series of 7 or 8 novels, write the whole lot first, and then start posting them up, because people are very greedy for the next one, and they don't want to wait a year and a half. You want to get them, and you give them the first one free, and then a month later you put the second one up and they pay for it. And from then on you hook them that way. Also, you've got to relentlessly promote yourself, which I could never self-publish for that reason alone. But the self-publishers who are successful, they are indefatigable. You have to hide them on Facebook, because they just
So, you know, some people might be wondering, why are we even talking about self-publishing? Because if you find out what the secrets are, you can be extremely successful.
Very.
And the main thing is that when you publish traditionally, and I can't quite remember the figures, maybe someone can help me. I think you get 3% of the royalties. Is that right?
Differs from publisher to publisher, but yeah, South Africa we get about 12%.
12%.
Of the retail price,
Yes.
not of the publisher's price.
No,
Correct. Yes.
Price, yeah.
So when you self-publish, you can get 60 to 80% of the retail price, but then you've got to be doing everything that the publisher would be doing. You've got to organize the cover design, an editor, and you've got to do the legwork to get it into the bookshops or however you're going to distribute it. So there are advantages and disadvantages. And if you are a people person and you marketing and driving your friends crazy on social media is what you're good at, that's, you know, it makes sense that you benefit from writing your own work, that you benefit financially. So
yeah, I think you also find later on that well-known writers like Barbara Freethy, for instance, she used to write for all 5 big publishers, and then she actually started doing her own thing, you know, way back before it was, you know, everybody else was doing it. And I listened to one of her talks where she explained how she started off by, you know, designing everything herself. By now she has enough money to pay people to do everything for her, but she still publishes it now under her own kind of, you know, publishing house. And of course, if you can do that, but then, as I said, she made a name initially by publishing through publishers, but that's not true of everybody. You do have people out there that's very successful, that goes the, you know, that way. But, you know, I just don't have the energy and all the time, you know, I want to write. I don't want to do all of that.
So very valuable points. Alex, did you have anything to add there?
I haven't done any self-publishing, but I do know people that have tried it. And I think the one thing that you shouldn't do is write one novel, as Helen mentioned. If you're going to write a series, put them all out at the same time. But the opposite of that also, don't write one novel and think that when you put it out there, you're going to, even if you do loads of blogs, you're going to have a bestseller. I think that one of the secrets with self-publishing is volume. So if you don't have a series, but you're publishing individual novels, keep them coming. because
Yeah,
it's not going to happen if you just have one novel floating around on Amazon, you know, with the billions of others that are there too.
I'm just picking up another question here in the group, from the group. Is it acceptable to submit to many publishers at once?
Some publishers would tell you, you know, in their manuscript guidelines, they would say, you may, you know, send this to more people, but let us know. And then others would definitely say, don't. So just, I would say, start by checking, you know, the guidelines of the specific publisher.
I think also for the overseas market, they're not that many publishers that just take unsolicited submissions. It's more that you would be submitting to agents. And then, like Elsa said, the agents will say whether it's okay that you do multiple submissions or whether they want to just one at a time. And yeah, so and follow the guidelines.
And that's important, I think.
We haven't even got through our first page of questions, and I see it's already time to start saying goodbye. So I'm gonna do one more question. It's again about publishing. How open are publishers to unsolicited manuscripts? Let's just say here in New Zealand, for starters, but it can be the same in South Africa. So all the small markets, because in the UK and the US, you have to have an agent unless they open their books once a year for unsolicited manuscripts. And they say we're accepting submissions, but it is rare. So, you know, if you're in a smaller country and you have got a strong local publishing scene, are they open to unsolicited manuscripts?
Well, I can just talk about the Afrikaans market. Yes, you don't need an agent for those. You can, but you have, I think, for both LAPA and NB publishers, although they don't really, but NB publishers has a lot of imprints. They have a particular imprint, Kwela, who's looking for local indigenous works, and they're doing very well. They have a fabulous editor there. But make sure that you go according to what they ask. But you don't need an agent. But, you know, especially first time around, you may land on a slush pile and it may take quite a while. Be prepared to wait at least a year, maybe even longer. But yeah, you can also, you know, send an email afterwards. But I think initially you have to send in a printed package. That's what they ask for initial work.
I think it's like the same things we've been talking about before, is you need to read the guidelines. You need to answer the questions that have been put out there. And if it says we are not taking unsolicited manuscripts, then they're not taking them. If they are, follow the guidelines, send them in. I have to say, one of my novel writing students has just come back to me last couple of days to say he didn't have any success in New Zealand, but he's actually been offered a contract through a UK publisher. So, yeah, look, I think do your homework. Whatever it says on their website or whatever guidelines they've got, if it says that we're not taking unsolicited, you're wasting your time.
And I think, you know, one can just also add that be prepared to be rejected numerous times and be prepared to pick yourself up and to keep telling yourself, I want to do this. Because, I mean, look, you can read these beautiful stories out there, J.K. Rowling's story, and everybody knows by now. You know, you get a lot of no's before this one particular one will say, yes, I like your story. But you have to keep going. Yeah,
definitely. I think that there's a side to writing that one doesn't really cover too much in writing courses, and that's the selling side. And you're the writer and you're the creative individual, but then when it comes to getting your book published, you actually become a salesperson. And I mean, we all know that salespeople go out and they might take a product out to 100 people or do 100 telephone calls before they actually get a yes. So for the writer, it's harder because you've made the product, and often you've put a lot of your heart and soul and whatever into the work. So all those no's really do sting, and it doesn't actually get better. But you just have to, as Elsa says, pick yourself up and keep going because you love doing it. And then also just one other thing about the publishing is when you do get one book published, I know everyone sort of has the secret idea that they're going to be like J.K. Rowling and have a huge bestseller, but the percentage of people who are like that are 0.00001. And most writers just have to keep writing, keep publishing, and after you've had about 5 books published, then you might be able to quit your day job, but don't quit before then.
I think one other aspect, and it actually just occurred to me, is that because when I was writing with Stargate, I was more or less obliged to go to various comic cons and conventions and science fiction conventions, and there's a whole world of it's quite different. But what I did do was I always made a point of walking around and checking what other people were doing, and I found quite a lot, particularly comic book artists and designers, were publishing their own work, and they were being picked up, and agents were actually using those venues. Similarly, I've seen it with libraries where you might have a fiction week, and somebody will proactively go along and say, look, these are the books I've published, and they're there and they look intriguing, and people buy them, and they are often picked up by agents in that surprising settings. So when you're looking, if you are self-publishing, when you're looking to market yourself, look for those opportunities.
Helen, would you like to close just by telling us a little bit about your publishing experience? Did you find that once you were known, was it easy to keep getting published and get your work published, even though, or were you commissioned to keep writing? How did it work for you?
You build up a relationship with your publishers. And although I've published with most of the South African publishers, I always go back to Human and Rousseau because they're who I started with. And you build up a relationship with the editor, and you can pick up the phone and say, I've got an idea for this. Do you have a gap in your market for a series or a story like this? And if they say yes, you're away. But and obviously, and sometimes they'll say no. But that's how I go about it. It's much easier once you got your foot in the door. But that's a small local publisher. Mm-hmm. But build up relationships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Elsa and Alex and Sonny. Thank you so much for sharing your time and all your hard-won experience with these aspirant writers, and also to everyone that's here tonight or today. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you got something of value out of it. And it looks like we're going to have to be doing this once a month because as I say, we didn't even get through a fifth of the questions, and I haven't even looked. I see we've got 20 questions that have come up in the group. So my apologies that we couldn't get further. We'll hopefully be meeting again. We're going to have a whole monthly series.
Good.
So wherever you are, if it's good day in the morning or good night, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Nichola, for organizing this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Go write your books.
Yeah.